After my sister canceled my promotion invite, I chose revenge and sat in row 1, quietly smiling. I'm Commander Lydia Anderson, 36, and I worked my way up through naval intelligence without ever asking for the spotlight. For years, I was the quiet older sister, bailing Alexa out, co-signing leases, stepping in whenever she stumbled. But when she told me I wasn't worthy of attending her husband's Navy promotion, I made a different choice, and everything changed. Ever been dismissed or cut out by someone you always showed up for? If so, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before we get into it, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw a hard line with family, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, self-worth, and quiet justice. What happened next caught everyone off guard. Growing up, Alexa and I were close enough in age that people assumed we'd be naturally close. But even then, there was a pecking order, and she had no trouble climbing to the top of it. She was loud, confident, always had something clever to say, always knew how to get attention. I was the one standing off to the side, making sure she didn't fall flat on her face. It's not that I didn't have a voice, I just didn't use it much, not when it came to family. I was quiet, dependable, and apparently that made me easier to forget. Our parents had a way of reinforcing that dynamic without ever saying it out loud. If Alexa skipped curfew, it was a phase. If I did, it was a betrayal. If she needed money for a school trip, the whole household adjusted. If I needed something, I was expected to make do. I started working part-time at 15. Alexa didn't. She didn't need to. I picked up the slack early and never stopped. I was already in college by the time she graduated high school. And I remember the day she called me in tears because our parents couldn't cover the full cost of her first semester tuition. She didn't ask for anything directly, just said she wasn't sure if she was going to be able to go. I wired her the rest of what she needed that same afternoon. Didn't think twice about it. She called me her guardian angel. I left, told her to just do the same for someone else one day. That's the thing. I didn't do it because I expected anything back. I did it because she was my sister, and I wanted her to win. That was the pattern for years. She'd get herself in a bind, and I'd quietly, cleanly fix it. When her car broke down in her junior year, I dipped into my savings to help cover repairs. When she graduated and couldn't find work, I edited her resume, coached her through interviews, and let her stay with me for 2 months rent-free. When she finally landed a job and got engaged to Josh, I was genuinely happy for her. I co-signed the lease on their first apartment so they could move out of his parents' house. She said, "I swear we'll only need you for this 1 year. They stayed for 3. I never brought it up." Josh was polite in a stiff, somewhat performative way. The kind of guy who shook your hand a little too hard and always mentioned his Navy status within the first 5 minutes of conversation. I wasn't impressed, but Alexa was. She wore his rank like it was hers. I noticed early on that whenever she mentioned me around his friends, I was always her sister, the smart one, or her sister, the stable one. Never by name, never in a way that made me sound real, just a placeholder in a story that centered on her. Still, I showed up. I helped them move, bought them furniture when theirs fell apart, covered their electric bill once when Josh's pay got delayed. I went to every cookout, every birthday, every family gathering, even when it meant rearranging my schedule or traveling on short notice. When their son was born, I drove 6 hours in a snowstorm to meet him at the hospital. She cried when I got there, said she didn't know what she'd do without me. I believed her. Maybe that was my mistake. It's not that I expected a parade. I just assumed the closeness meant something, that being the one who showed up would eventually be seen for what it was: loyalty, love, family. But over time, I started noticing that whenever I needed something, she got quiet. When I got laid off during a company-wide restructuring, she sent a generic, "You'll bounce back" text and didn't follow up. When my lease was up and I mentioned I might look for a new city, she told me she couldn't emotionally manage any more changes right now. That was the language she used. Emotionally manage, as if I were just another variable she had to work around. But I didn't push. I told myself everyone has seasons. Maybe hers was just more self-focused right now. I kept giving, smaller things, more subtle, but they added up. Tax questions every March, help researching childcare options, editing her grant applications when she decided to go back to school. All quiet things, all things you only notice when they stop being done for you. What I didn't realize at the time was that Alexa's world was slowly reshaping itself around a very specific image, one where status mattered more than substance, where being associated with the right kind of people became its own kind of currency. I wasn't flashy. I didn't have a uniform. I didn't brag. I didn't post curated photos of brunch or talk about duty and honor over mimosas. I just got things done. But that doesn't translate well on Instagram. And in her orbit, what didn't sparkle didn't count. I'd show up at events and find myself introduced awkwardly or not at all. One time, she called me my sister, the private one, and said it like it was a punchline. Another time, someone at her birthday party asked what I did for a living, and Alexa answered for me incorrectly. I corrected her gently, and she just laughed and said, "Close enough," like I was a footnote in her story. It started happening more often, that sense of being useful but not valued. But I kept showing up. I told myself she was busy, that being a military spouse was hard, that I shouldn't take it personally. I didn't want to be dramatic. I didn't want to be one of those siblings who kept score. But the older I got, the more I started noticing just how one-sided it all felt, like I was playing a role she had written for me years ago. And no matter how much I grew or how much I achieved, I was never allowed to step outside of it. It wasn't bitterness. It was exhaustion. Quiet, steady exhaustion from being dependable without being seen, from always being called when something needed fixing and never when something needed celebrating, from watching her rise and shine while I stood backstage making sure the lights stayed on and then stepping back into the dark before anyone noticed. Still, when she sent the invite to Josh's promotion ceremony, I didn't hesitate. I texted back, wouldn't miss it because I wouldn't, because that's who I was. Because even if she didn't see me the way I wanted her to, I still saw her, and I still believed that mattered. At least I did then. The shift wasn't instant. It never is. It crept in slowly, like something growing in the walls. The first few signs were easy to miss because they looked like busyness. She didn't return my texts as quickly, started calling less. When I did get her on the phone, she'd talk for 10 minutes straight about base events, the new commissary renovations, or how Josh was tracking toward his next promotion. I'd ask how she was holding up, and she'd pivot back to him. He's been working 12-hour days, but it's what you sign up for when you're committed to something bigger than yourself. I let that one go. I let a lot go at first. Then came the officer's ball. She called 2 weeks before, breathless. I found the perfect dress. Navy blue satin, floor-length structured bodice, just enough shimmer to look high command, but not so much that it screams trying too hard. She laughed like it was a shared joke. "You get it?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then she said, "You and Paul should come next year." "Well, actually, you can't unless Josh sponsors you. It's technically for Navy families only." The way she said technically, it wasn't about rules. It was about exclusivity. A line drawn quietly with a smile. Over the holidays, it got worse. We were at our parents' house sitting around the table after dinner. Paul, my fiancé, was telling a story about his work. He's in nonprofit operations, very good at what he does, incredibly grounded. Alexa interrupted him halfway through. "That's cute," she said. "But I swear, unless you've served, people just don't understand what real discipline looks like." I looked at her, waiting for the laugh that would tell me she was joking. It didn't come. Paul smiled politely. I changed the subject. She started referring to me as my civilian sister in casual conversation. It was always followed by a little laugh, like she was winking at someone I couldn't see. At first, I told myself she was just proud of Josh, that she was wrapped up in a culture that encouraged all that language. Duty, honor, ranks, titles. But over time, it became clear it wasn't just about admiration. It was about hierarchy. And she'd found one that finally placed her above me. We used to have a rhythm, even when she was busy. Sunday check-ins, birthday calls, the occasional spontaneous lunch if we were both in town. But as Josh climbed the ladder, the rhythm unraveled. I'd text her updates about my life and get short, emoji-filled replies hours later. She started declining invitations to anything that wasn't military adjacent. When I asked if she wanted to do a spa weekend, something we used to plan every spring, she said, "That sounds fun, but I have a Navy wives retreat that month. You know how it is." Except I didn't, and she knew that. She began using terms that felt foreign, like she was speaking a language only she and her new circle understood. PC's season, O for protocol, flag-level etiquette. I tried to follow, Googled things in secret just so I wouldn't sound clueless when she brought them up, but the more I tried to meet her halfway, the more it felt like she moved the goalpost. It wasn't just that I didn't know the acronyms. It was that I wasn't in, and she liked that. It gave her something to hold over me, a new identity, one she didn't have to share. The real change came when she joined a Facebook group for officer spouses. She mentioned it once during a call, casually, like it was no big deal, it's just a place for women who understand this lifestyle, she said. But after that, her vocabulary and her tone shifted completely. She started quoting the group like it was gospel. One of the wives said something that really stuck with me. Marrying a man in uniform means rising with his rank. I asked her what that meant, and she said, "It means you carry yourself like you earn those stripes too, and you don't waste energy on people who don't understand the responsibility." It wasn't subtle. I was the person who didn't understand. She stopped asking about my work altogether. When I told her about a promotion I'd received, something I'd worked hard for, she said, "That's great. Are they giving you a badge or a medal?" Then she laughed as if she was being playful, but her eyes didn't match her voice when she said it. One night, I scrolled through her Facebook feed, something I hadn't done in a while. The photos were crisp, perfectly lit, her in uniform-themed cocktail dresses, her and Josh at military galas, her posing with other wives in color-coordinated outfits, all captioned with phrases like, "proud to serve beside those who serve" or "elite company only." I wasn't tagged in any of the recent ones, not even the family gatherings. I realized I hadn't appeared in her digital life in almost a year. I didn't confront her. I didn't want to sound jealous or petty. But when I did ask her gently if she still had time for non-military stuff, she just said, "It's not that I don't want to. I just don't relate to a lot of it anymore." Then she added, "It's hard to go back once you've seen what excellence really looks like." That one stayed with me longer than I expected, not because it was cruel, but because it sounded like she believed it. The next time we saw each other was at our cousin's baby shower. She walked in 10 minutes late, wearing a navy sheath dress that looked like it belonged on a podium, not in a backyard. She brought a framed photo of Josh in uniform as part of her gift, something about honoring family legacy. When I asked if she wanted to carpool home, she waved me off. "I'm meeting up with the command wives after this. We're planning a fundraiser." I offered her a container of leftover cupcakes, and she said, "Oh, no thanks. I'm watching Sugar, trying to stay within regs." Again, that word, regs, like it was some inside joke she didn't want to explain. By then, the distance wasn't accidental. It was curated. Every interaction felt like a subtle reminder of what I wasn't. I wasn't military. I wasn't polished in the way she wanted to be seen. I wasn't someone she could show off. I was background noise. Safe, steady, but not useful anymore. I told Paul one night, half laughing, "I think my sister's trying to rebrand herself, and I don't fit the aesthetic." He didn't laugh. He just said, "Maybe she thinks she's finally the star of the story." I wanted to argue with him to defend her, but I couldn't, because part of me had started to wonder if that's exactly what was happening. And yet, when she sent the formal invitation to Josh's promotion, I still said yes. I bought a dress, booked the hotel, cleared my calendar, because even after all of it, every subtle jab, every inside joke, every time she looked through me instead of at me, I still believed there was a part of her that remembered who we used to be. And maybe, in the right moment, I'd get a glimpse of that version again. I didn't know then that she had one more surprise planned, one that would erase any doubt about where I stood in her new world. The text came through on a Monday morning in a group chat with our parents, an aunt, and a few cousins. Just a simple message: Josh's promotion ceremony is Friday the 12th at 1300 hours, Admiral Hall, Main Base. Dress code formal. Would love to see everyone there to support him. She added a photo of the invite and a little navy emoji, like it was a party flyer. I remember staring at it for a second too long, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Nothing seemed off. If anything, it felt unusually warm. I sent a quick RSVP, "I'll be there." Looking forward to it. She hearted it. No hint of tension, no weird energy, just logistics. I took it at face value. I even called Paul afterward and told him I was glad she'd included me. "Maybe she's softening up again," I said. "Maybe all that distance was just stress." He didn't say anything right away, then carefully, just go with no expectations. He meant well, but I brushed it off. I had already cleared my schedule and started looking for something appropriate to wear. 3 days later, she called. No text ahead of time, just a ring in the middle of the afternoon. I picked up, thinking maybe she had last-minute updates. Maybe she wanted to coordinate something for the family. Her voice was bright at first, too bright. "Hey, you have a minute?" "Yeah, what's up?" Then a pause, a small breath. I could tell something was coming, like the sentence was being practiced in her head. "So, about the ceremony..." I waited. "It's not a big deal, but I just wanted to clarify something. This event is really more for direct military connections, inner circle stuff. It's a little more formal than what you're probably used to. I didn't say anything, not yet. She filled the silence. I just don't want you to feel out of place. It's a Navy event, not a family gathering. It was rehearsed. I could hear it in the way she paced her words, like she'd said them to someone else first, maybe to Josh, maybe to that Facebook group she always quoted. "I'm your sister," I said. She let out a short laugh, but it didn't have warmth in it. "And this is his career. It's not about family, it's about his rank and the people who understand what that means." That part stuck, the people who understand what that means. I knew better than to argue. I could have reminded her how many times I'd shown up, how often I'd supported them both without asking for anything in return. But she wasn't calling to discuss anything. She was calling to deliver a message, and she wanted to make sure it landed without pushback. So I didn't argue, I just said, "Okay." Then I hung up. I don't remember how long I sat there after the call. The room was quiet. I could hear the sound of the fridge kicking on, distant traffic outside the window. I wasn't angry yet, that came later. At first, it was just a kind of stillness, like something had stopped moving and I was only just noticing it. I replayed the conversation once, then again, tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe she was stressed, maybe she didn't mean it to sound as cold as it did. But deep down, I knew exactly what had happened. She didn't want me there because I didn't fit the aesthetic she'd curated. I wasn't military, I didn't speak the language, I wasn't useful to the image she wanted to present. That was the part that stung the most, not just being excluded, but being excluded strategically. It wasn't an oversight, it was intentional. I told Paul that night. We were sitting on the couch, dinner plates still on the coffee table. I recited the whole call word for word, trying to keep my voice even. He listened, then asked quietly, "Do you want to go anyway?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Yeah. If she doesn't want me there, I'm not going to force it." He nodded, but his jaw was tight. "That's low," he said. "Even for her." I didn't disagree, but I didn't say anything else either. I was still trying to wrap my head around the fact that someone I'd been loyal to my entire life had drawn a line like that so casually, like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. For the next few days, I kept waiting for her to follow up. Maybe she'd text. Maybe she'd realize how it sounded and call to walk it back, but nothing came, not even a vague apology. She moved on like the conversation never happened, and the group chat stayed active. She continued posting updates, how proud she was, what a huge moment this was for Josh's career. Our parents chimed in with heart emojis and comments about how they couldn't wait to see it. No one mentioned me. I didn't bring it up. I got a message from my cousin Lauren a few days before the ceremony. She asked if I was still going. I told her no, that it was more of a military thing. She paused for a beat, then wrote, "But I thought she invited you." She changed her mind. There was a long pause. Then, "Wow, I'm sorry. That's cold." I left it there. There wasn't anything else to say. It wasn't the first time Alexa had pushed me aside, but it was the first time she did it so openly. And in that moment, it felt final. Not like a fight we'd recover from, more like a door being closed and locked from the other side. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just shut down for a while, skipped the ceremony, deleted the invite from my phone. When the photos started circulating, Alexa in another structured navy dress, Josh beaming beside her, the stage, the flags, the captions about honor and tradition, I didn't look at them for long, just enough to confirm what I already knew. I wasn't missed. She'd built a life that didn't include me, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I didn't help her look more important, because I didn't reinforce the narrative she was trying to sell. And when someone's more concerned with their image than their relationships, there's no space for nuance. You're either a prop or a problem. I guess I'd stopped being useful somewhere along the way. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd made a few quiet changes in the past year, changes that didn't fit her script. And while she was busy deciding who counted as worthy, I was preparing to show her just how wrong she was. Not through confrontation, not through revenge, just by walking into a room she never thought I'd belong in and letting the truth speak for itself. Paul didn't push. After I told him I wasn't going, he just nodded once and said, "Okay." There wasn't anything else to discuss. He knew what she said, he knew what it meant, and he knew better than to suggest I give her the benefit of the doubt. But the silence that followed settled heavy, not just between us, but around me. I wasn't angry in the loud way. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even raise my voice. I just moved through the next few days in that slow, weighted kind of motion that only comes when something sinks deeper than you expected it to. On the outside, nothing had changed. My inbox was full. I still had deadlines. I still showed up to meetings, hit send on emails, followed up on tasks. But inside, there was this running reel I couldn't shut off. Just the same question over and over: how did she get here? I kept circling back, not to the ceremony itself, but to everything that came before it. I thought about the tuition deposit, the lease I co-signed, the late-night calls where I talked her through job interviews she was panicking about, the baby shower I hosted when she was too tired to plan anything herself, the time she crashed her car and I sent money without even asking how much the repairs would be. Every moment I made things easier, every time I stepped up, not because I wanted recognition, but because I thought that's what you did when you love someone. And now I was being told I didn't belong, not because of anything I said or did, but because I didn't look the part, because I wasn't in the right circle, because I didn't wear the right kind of status on my sleeve. It wasn't just the exclusion, it was the ease with which she did it, the way she said inner circle like it was a perfectly reasonable excuse to leave her sister off the list, the way she framed it like I should have known better, like I should have understood that I was out of place before she even had to say it. That was what kept me up. Not the rejection itself, but the realization that somewhere along the way she had rewritten the story. And in this new version, I was an extra. Someone who helped build the foundation but wasn't meant to be seen in the finished product. The night after her call, I sat on the floor in our spare room. It's where we keep old paperwork, bins of photos, things we don't use but haven't thrown out. I found a small box tucked behind a row of folders, stuff from college, letters, notes, a few printed photos from before everything went digital. There was one of her and me from my graduation. She was 16, hair in a messy bun, wearing my jacket because she forgot hers, and it was freezing that day. She looked proud. I was holding my diploma, smiling at the camera, and she had both arms wrapped around my waist. I sat there for a long time, just holding that picture, trying to understand how we got from that moment to this one. I knew I needed to get the weight out of my head. So I opened my notebook, nothing fancy, just the one I use when I need to work something out that doesn't fit into polite conversation, and I wrote a letter, not to her. She wasn't going to read it. This was for me. I didn't write angry, I wrote clear. I listed everything I'd let slide, every time I'd excused behavior that made me feel small, every moment I downplayed her dismissiveness, chalked it up to stress or insecurity or bad timing. I wrote about the pattern, how I showed up again and again and again, and how each time she met that with a little less gratitude and a little more distance. I wrote about how I kept lowering the bar for what I considered acceptable just to keep the peace, how I convinced myself that being quiet was noble, that being understanding was love. And then I wrote a line I hadn't let myself say out loud: she didn't outgrow me, she devalued me. There's a difference. Growth is natural. Relationships change, people evolve. But this wasn't growth. This was erasure. She'd found a version of herself that got her the validation she wanted, and I didn't fit in it, not because of who I was, but because of what I didn't represent. I wasn't prestigious. I wasn't part of the institution. I wasn't someone she could point to as a reflection of her status. I closed the notebook, didn't tear the page out, didn't reread it, just folded the cover shut and sat with it. That night, Paul made dinner. He didn't say much, but when he passed me the plate, he paused. "You okay?" I nodded. Then, after a beat, I think this was the last time. The last time for what? The last time I let her make me feel like I'm not enough. He didn't say anything, just reached out and touched my wrist for a second, then went back to eating. I kept thinking about that idea, not enough. How it shows up in such quiet ways. It's not always someone saying it outright. Sometimes it's a tone, a choice, a slow fade. It's someone deciding you're not worth bringing into the room. Not because you failed them, but because you remind them of a version of themselves they're trying to forget. And I knew then, without drama or performance, that I was done chasing her approval, done shrinking to fit into whatever role she wanted me to play, done proving my value to someone who treated it like a disposable resource. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was just a shift, a quiet, final one, because I still believed in family. I still believed in showing up, but not at the cost of disappearing. The thing is, she thought I would just vanish after that call, that I would take the hint, absorb the slight, and stay in my corner like I always had. She didn't realize I'd already stepped out of it, and soon enough she was going to find out, not because I was planning to confront her, not because I wanted to make a scene, but because life has a way of circling back. And when it did, I wasn't going to be standing outside the room. I was going to be center stage, not to prove anything, just to remind her who she underestimated. I didn't go scorched earth. That's never been my style. I didn't send a long message laying out everything she'd done wrong or try to spark a family referendum about who was in the right. I just made some quiet adjustments. First was the shared family account. Years ago, when Alexa and I were both still juggling rent, bills, and inconsistent paychecks, I set up a household backup fund. It wasn't big, just something to cover emergencies, car trouble, late fees, surprise vet bills. At first, she used it once or twice a year. Then it became routine. Her deposits into it stopped altogether after her second job switch, but her withdrawals never did. I logged in one morning, moved the remaining balance into a separate account, and revoked her access. I didn't say anything about it. There was no need. If she ever noticed, she never brought it up. And if she did notice, maybe for once she'd wonder what it felt like to be quietly cut out of something you assumed would always be there. Then came the texts. After the call where she disinvited me, she tried to keep up appearances. She sent the occasional "hope your week's going well" message, sprinkled in links to articles about Navy traditions as if still testing whether I was useful as an audience. One morning, she sent a picture of a dress she was considering for the ceremony, silver satin, structured neckline. "Too much?" she asked, like nothing had happened. I didn't reply. A few days later, she texted again. "Would you mind watching Max next weekend? Josh and I are flying out early for the reception, and the sitter canceled." I stared at the screen for a full minute before typing a single word, "No." She replied, "Everything okay?" I didn't answer that one at all. That's when my mother called. Her tone was soft, practiced. Half concern, half peacekeeping. "Alexa said you've been distant." She phrased it like it was a question. I didn't bite. I've been clear. She hesitated. "You know how much pressure she's under right now. Military life isn't easy. There's a lot on her plate." I stayed quiet. "She didn't mean to hurt your feelings. She didn't hurt my feelings. She made a decision. I'm just responding to it." More silence. Then, "Can't we just let this go?" "No, Mom, we can't." She made it a thing when she decided I wasn't worthy of being her sister in public. I could tell she didn't know what to say after that, so I ended the call politely but firmly. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from always being the one to smooth things over. I didn't have it in me anymore. The week stretched on. I avoided social media. I didn't want to see the countdown posts or the rehearsed excitement. Paul asked if I was okay a few times. I said yes. And for the first time in a while, I actually meant it. There was something surprisingly calm about not needing to perform closeness anymore. The performance had always taken more out of me than I realized. Then, on a Wednesday morning, 9 days before the ceremony, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was short: "Formal invitation, promotion ceremony, Lieutenant Commander Joshua Redmond." The sender was a naval command address. I opened it, assuming it was a mass distribution, but it wasn't. The body of the message was direct, professional, and personalized. They were extending an invitation to me by name as a special civilian guest with front row seating designated. The line that caught me off guard: "In recognition of your service, leadership, and current standing with naval intelligence, we would be honored by your presence." It didn't feel real at first. I reread the message twice, then clicked the attachment. There it was, my name printed in bold at the top of a formal seating assignment document. Underneath it, my title, Commander, U.S. Naval Reserve Strategic Intelligence Unit. Not many people knew. I joined the reserves almost 4 years earlier, after a long period of quiet interest and a well-timed opportunity. It had been a private decision, one I made without announcement or fanfare. I didn't post about it. I didn't talk about it unless someone asked directly. It wasn't secrecy, it was privacy, and maybe, if I'm honest, a little self-protection. I didn't need Alexa turning it into something performative. The irony wasn't lost on me. While she'd been curating her image around proximity to rank, I'd been building one quietly in parallel, not to prove a point, just because I'd wanted it. Paul came home that night to find me sitting at the kitchen table, rereading the email. He glanced at the screen. "That's the invitation?" I nodded. "They want you there?" "They do." He smiled. "Front row, huh?" "Apparently. We didn't talk about Alexa. We didn't have to. The facts were enough." I sat with the decision for 2 more days, not because I was unsure about going, but because I wanted to be clear about my reasons. I wasn't showing up to spite her. I wasn't interested in some vindictive victory lap. I just wasn't going to pretend anymore that I didn't belong. And if the Navy, the actual institution she'd spent years glorifying, had made space for me on that stage, then no amount of gatekeeping from her would undo that. I replied to the email, confirming my attendance. Short, professional, grateful. Then I went back to my notebook, the same one I'd used weeks earlier to write that letter to myself. I flipped to a clean page and wrote a single sentence, show up quietly. Let the facts speak louder than the narrative. And then I closed it. Again, no dramatics, just preparation. Because she had spent months, maybe years, curating a version of reality where I was always one step behind her, always on the sidelines, always grateful just to be included. What she hadn't realized was that I'd never been behind. I'd just been moving in a direction she never bothered to look. And now, for once, she'd have no choice but to see it, not in a confrontation, not in an argument, but in a single moment, on a stage, in full view. No script, just truth. The morning of the ceremony was clear and sharp, the kind of weather that made everything look cleaner than it was. I arrived early, I always do. The gate guard checked my ID, glanced at the uniform, and nodded me through without a word. Just like that, I was inside the base. I parked near the administrative offices and walked the rest of the way. My dress uniform fit the way it always did. Structured, formal, a little stiff through the shoulders, but familiar. I'd worn it enough times that I no longer second-guessed the creases or the way the collar sat at my throat. I wasn't there for the photos. I was there because I'd earned it. The venue was a multi-purpose auditorium on the west side of the base, high ceilings, rows of padded chairs, polished floor, flags lining the stage. I took my seat near the front, exactly where the invitation had placed me, third row, center aisle, directly behind the line of chairs reserved for active-duty families. I recognized a few of the faces on stage, senior officers I'd worked with, one or two from joint briefings I'd sat in on last year. None of them looked surprised to see me. That was the difference. In this world, my presence wasn't strange, it wasn't unexpected, it just was. Alexa didn't see me at first. She and Josh entered through the side doors 15 minutes before the ceremony started. He was in full dress whites, bars polished, shoes reflecting everything above them. She wore a pale gray sheath dress and carried herself like someone ready for a magazine cover. She looked proud, composed, and absolutely certain of her place in the room. They took their seats in the front row, third and fourth from the left. She laughed at something the man beside her said. Josh adjusted the sleeve of his uniform. They looked like a picture. I didn't move. The ceremony opened with the standard acknowledgments, command announcements, recognition of guests, brief remarks on the significance of promotion ceremonies in the officer pipeline. Then came the moment that shifted the air in the room. The Admiral stepped forward, the same one I'd worked under for a temporary assignment last fall. He didn't look at me right away, didn't make a gesture, just kept his tone even and direct. We have a special guest joining us today, a respected officer in her own right, and someone whose leadership has made a measurable impact in operations across our strategic intelligence network. That's when Alexa turned her head just slightly. I saw the motion out of the corner of my eye. She was trying to figure out who he was referring to. The Admiral continued, "Please welcome Commander." He paused, let the silence hang just long enough, of the Atlantic Fleet and a proud older sister. He turned toward me. I stood, stepped forward. The entire row shifted slightly to make room. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't strut. I walked with the kind of deliberate calm we're trained for, shoulders squared, expression neutral, eyes ahead. The click of my heels on the polished floor was the only sound in the room. When I reached the stage, I saluted. The Admiral returned it. Then he handed me a small folder, formal commendation, sealed. I didn't open it. I tucked it under my arm, turned to face the audience, and spoke exactly 3 words. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Commander." Josh's expression didn't change right away. His posture held, but his face was frozen in that half-smile people wear when they don't know how to process what they're seeing. His eyes flicked toward Alexa. Alexa looked like the air had been knocked out of her. She didn't blink, didn't shift, just sat there, completely still, mouth parted just enough to make her look caught. And she was, not by me, but by the reality she hadn't accounted for. I took my seat beside the Admiral, second from the end. I didn't look back at her. The rest of the ceremony moved on. Commendations were issued, ranks were pinned, photos were taken. Applause happened at regular intervals. I clapped when appropriate. I kept my hands folded when not. I didn't perform. I didn't explain. There was nothing to explain. What happened wasn't a moment of revenge. It wasn't about putting her in her place. It was about making sure I didn't keep stepping out of mine just to make her comfortable. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the next hall. Light refreshments, name tags, small clusters of people catching up or introducing themselves. I stayed near the back, sipping coffee, answering a few questions from a colleague I hadn't seen in over a year. Then I felt the shift in the room, a hush, followed by footsteps. She walked up slowly. No entourage, no husband. Her voice was quieter than I expected. You didn't tell me. No, I said. You're in the Navy. I'm in the reserves. Have been for a while. She stared at me, then glanced down at the commendation folder I was still holding. Commander, I nodded. There was a long pause. Why didn't you ever say anything? I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't want to use them carelessly. Then I said, because you never asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. How many times she'd talked over me, how often she'd rerouted conversations back to herself, how little she'd listened. I wasn't trying to exclude you, she said. You told me I wasn't part of the inner circle, that this wasn't a family reunion. I'm not misremembering that. She looked down, embarrassed. I didn't know. No, I said again, calmly this time. You didn't want to know. That was the end of it. She didn't try to apologize, not fully, and I didn't ask her to. We stood there for a few more seconds, then someone called her name. She nodded, gave me a stiff smile, and walked away. I didn't follow. There's something strange about watching people recalibrate their perception of you in real time. They think they know your boundaries. They think they've mapped out your usefulness, your reach, your worth. Then one small shift reveals a version of you they never considered, and suddenly they're the ones scrambling to catch up. I stayed for another 20 minutes, long enough to shake hands, thank the Admiral, exchange contact info with a few officers I knew professionally. Then I left the reception through the side exit, the same way I came in. Outside, the sun was higher now, brighter. The base traffic was picking up, rows of cars filing past as the next shift rolled in. I reached the car, opened the door, and sat for a moment before turning the engine. I looked down at the commendation in my lap. I hadn't earned it for anything splashy, no dramatic operation, no medal-worthy mission, just solid work over a long stretch of time, quiet leadership, diligent strategy, things that didn't show up on Instagram but mattered to the people who paid attention. That was enough for me. I didn't need Alexa to be impressed. I didn't need her to say sorry. I just needed her to see what she'd missed while she was too busy trying to climb. And now she had. The base was mostly quiet by nightfall. I'd stayed later than I planned, half out of habit, half because it felt easier than driving home right away. I'd changed out of my uniform, thrown on a simple black sweater and jeans, and taken a slow walk around the grounds. No destination, just moving. The officers' mess hall was still lit, though mostly empty. A few silhouettes drifted near the back, late cleanup crew or overnight staff, no one I recognized. I sat on the low concrete ledge along the outer wall, arms resting on my knees, the air cooling down just enough to feel like evening. I didn't hear her footsteps until she was almost in front of me. Alexa stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. Not defensive, just holding herself together. Her hair was down now, her makeup softer. She looked less like the polished image she always curated, and more like the girl I used to share a room with. She didn't speak right away. I waited, then finally, why didn't you tell me? There was no challenge in it, no edge, just quiet confusion, the kind that comes when your world starts rearranging itself and you realize how many details you never asked for. I looked up at her because you never asked. She didn't argue, just nodded once, as if she'd already said that to herself earlier and this was just confirmation. I turned my eyes back to the sidewalk, gave her time. After a moment, she lowered herself onto the ledge a few feet away from me. We sat in silence, the distance between us not quite closed, but no longer sharp. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't respond, not to punish her, just to let her keep going. I needed to hear it all, not just the opening line. She exhaled, shaky. I didn't mean for it to get like this. I didn't think. She stopped herself. Actually, that's the problem. I didn't think. I got caught up. In what? I asked finally. She hesitated, then shrugged. The wives group, the rank, the image. I don't know. At first it felt like survival, trying to learn the ropes, fit in, be the kind of spouse that doesn't mess things up for their partner. But then it became performative, like everything was about who sat where, who wore what, who was invited to what table, and I played along. I stayed quiet. She looked over at me. I thought I was doing what I was supposed to, that the more exclusive it looked, the better we'd be seen, and that if I stayed in those circles, things would keep moving forward for Josh, and that meant cutting out the people who didn't help with the optics. Her shoulders slumped. Yeah, basically. I didn't soften my tone. You said I wasn't part of your inner circle, that this wasn't a family reunion. She winced. I know. I hate that I said that. You didn't just say it, you meant it. She nodded. I did, and I was wrong. There was another pause. She looked like she was struggling to hold something down. Tears, maybe, or shame. I didn't reach for her. I let the space between us stay still. I saw your name on that program, she said quietly, and for a second I thought it was a typo. Like, someone mixed you up with someone else. Then I saw you walk in. Her voice cracked. I just felt so small. That wasn't the goal, I said. I know. That's what made it worse. She rubbed her palms together like she was cold, even though the air was still mild. It's not just that I didn't know, it's that I didn't care to find out. I assumed you were the same person you were 5 years ago, just because it made things easier for me. I looked over at her then, not because I needed her to feel seen, but because I wanted her to see that I hadn't disappeared, that I'd been there the whole time. She just hadn't bothered to look. This wasn't about rank, I said. It never was. It was about respect. She nodded quickly, like the sentence hit her in the stomach. I didn't need to be on stage. I didn't need the front row. I just needed to not be dismissed. She wiped at her face, frustrated with herself. I don't know how to fix this. I shook my head. You don't fix it. You show up, you listen, you rebuild. She sat back. The quiet settled again. I miss you, she said after a while. I miss who we were, I replied. But I'm not going back to that version, not if it means disappearing again. She nodded, understood. We didn't hug. We didn't pretend it was all okay. But when she finally stood up to leave, she paused, looked down at me one last time and said, If you ever want to talk, actually talk. I'm here. I'll let you know. It wasn't closure, but it was movement. That night, back at the hotel, I wrote another note in my notebook. Just a few lines, nothing formal, just something I needed to get out. Boundaries don't mean walking away. They mean walking differently and letting people catch up at their own pace if they're willing to. Alexa hadn't earned back everything, not yet, but she'd cracked something open. That mattered more than I expected it to. A few days later, she sent a message. No emojis, no links, just, if you're free next week, I'd like to take you to lunch. No agenda. Just me. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to see if she followed up. She did. And when I finally said yes, I meant it with new terms, with clear expectations, with the understanding that this time trust wasn't a given. It had to be earned. And she knew it. It's been over a year since the ceremony. Alexa and I talk occasionally now, messages about our parents, the occasional forwarded article, sometimes photos of her son. He's older now, starting to lose that baby softness around the face. When she sends me pictures, she includes short captions, nothing overly sentimental, just enough to say, I'm still here, still trying. We haven't had a big emotional reckoning. No heart-to-hearts about what happened or long apologies with tears and promises. Just small, measured efforts. I don't expect more than that. I don't think I need to because I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done giving more than what's asked for. I don't chase connection. I don't bend into the shape of what someone needs, just so they don't feel uncomfortable. I don't clean up her messes anymore. I don't get pulled into emergencies she created. I don't play the role of her invisible safety net. She's noticed the difference. I think when she called last spring about a scheduling conflict, needed someone to pick up her son from a daycare she hadn't cleared with anyone, I told her calmly that I couldn't rearrange my day. I didn't over-explain, didn't offer to help find a solution, just a simple no. She didn't fight it. She said, got it, and hung up. I could tell it landed differently, that she was finally starting to understand that boundaries weren't threats, they were shifts. I stayed in the reserves. I kept my work quiet, consistent, the kind of work most people wouldn't recognize as significant unless they were inside it. That suited me just fine. A few months ago, I received another promotion. No ceremony, no stage, just a formal notice, new designation, updated ID. I told Paul. I told my colleagues. I didn't tell Alexa, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I knew what I'd earned. I knew where I stood. It's funny, looking back, how much weight I used to place on being seen. How often I let other people define the scope of my worth based on how loudly they clapped, or how often they invited me in. But the truth is, being visible doesn't mean being valued, and being overlooked doesn't mean being unimportant. The real shift happened in that room that day on base. Not because I stood on a stage, but because of what came before it. The years of silence, the years of showing up anyway, the years of giving without demanding. And then, finally, the moment when none of that was required. When the entire auditorium turned to face me, not as a guest, not as someone's sister, not as an accessory, but as a peer, an officer, a person who belonged. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even redemption. It was justice, quiet, inevitable, and long overdue. People forget sometimes who's been steady. They forget the ones who held them together while they figured out who they wanted to be. Status makes that easy. It's loud, it's polished, it's immediate, but it fades. Eventually, the noise quiets, the room's empty, the spotlight moves on, and what's left is the person standing in the back of the room, still solid, still consistent, still there. I don't expect Alexa to say those things. I don't need her to. But I think she knows them now, at least in some form. Last Thanksgiving, she pulled me aside as we were leaving my parents' house. Everyone else was in the kitchen dealing with leftovers. She stood by the front door, hands in her coat pockets, and said, "You've changed a lot this year." I looked at her. "No, I haven't. I've just stopped pretending I haven't grown." She gave me a half smile, that's fair. We hugged briefly, not performative, not cold, just real. Then we went our separate ways. That's how it's been. Not a reconciliation, not a rupture, just a recalibration. She asks different kinds of questions now. Sometimes they still carry traces of the old Alexa, polished, curated, a little performative. But more often she catches herself. She listens longer, she doesn't interrupt. It's not perfect, but I notice it. More importantly, I notice myself. The way I speak more clearly, the way I stop explaining things that don't require explanation, the way I let silence stand without rushing to fill it. There's a confidence that comes not from being praised, but from no longer needing to be. I used to think power looked like control, like being in charge of everything, managing outcomes, keeping people close by staying useful. Now I know better. Power is walking into a room where someone tried to erase you and being undeniable. It's choosing when to speak and when to walk away. It's knowing that your value doesn't fluctuate just because someone else doesn't recognize it. And more than anything, it's peace. Real peace, the kind that doesn't require permission or applause. There's something quiet and beautiful about living outside of other people's narratives, about not being anyone's prop, about no longer bending to fit into the frame they've chosen for themselves. I still go to the occasional family gathering. I still respond to texts when they deserve responses. I still answer the phone when Alexa calls if I have the bandwidth. But I don't shrink, I don't hustle for a seat, and I don't explain my presence because I don't need to anymore. Thanks for watching. Have you ever been excluded by someone close to you just because you didn't fit their image? How did you handle it? Did you confront them or let your actions speak for themselves? Drop your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you've ever had to set boundaries with family or reclaim your place after being underestimated, hit like and subscribe for more true stories like this. You deserve to be seen.